Coogs House. JWan said run it back, so we're going to run it back.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you're going to join the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below how you felt about Monday night's national championship game. I put it on Twitter, but I'll go ahead and answer this one. I don't always answer the question of the day. I just left that game wishing I got to see what Sampson had drawn up in the back pocket for Zach Edey and Donovan Clingan. I just think it would have worked. All right, today's episode, we're going to look some at the defensive line getting ready for spring football game this Saturday. I had some thoughts on coaching movements watching the national championship game on Monday night. But first and foremost, I guess start with the biggest Houston Cougar news on campus today, and it's really not even pertaining to a program currently going now that college basketball season's over. That is Jamal Roberts say he is returning to Hoops program with an Instagram and Twitter simultaneous announcement saying he is coming back, running it back with the Houston Cougars. Now, I admit I had some fun with this, going through social media and pointing out who was commenting what and what Cryer's comments or Shead's comments or whomever had to say. However that would go, right? A bunch of fun being had with this. But the big thing here is that the big fella is coming back to use that COVID year for one more. Now, this isn't a huge, gigantic surprise. Projecting Jamal Roberts to the pros is a challenging task just because he's such a prototypical college power forward. They'd ask him to stretch his game out behind the arc. And while I think he can pass and do a lot of stuff from out there, that's not really the things that he can pass the ball very well, but that's kind of things that he hadn't shown that he's doing as well as he might if he came back for another year. I think he's a dominant post scorer. I think he's a pro somewhere. We'll see what he continues to add to his game. But in the immediate future, his return makes Houston so much better, bringing back both starting members of the front court, bringing back a healthy JoJo Tugler, right? Then you got Said after a year of getting some extra minutes that he didn't necessarily anticipate this year, Said a lot, and then bringing Jacob McFarland after redshirting last year to gain some good weight. I mean, that's a bunch of front court depth really, really fast. You add in Terrence Arsenault, right? Arsenault coming back off of his injury as that swing forward spot. You can do small ball four stuff with him. Ramon Walker doing kind of the same thing. You could also put in that same kind of mix that Malik Wilson says he's coming back. He said that earlier in the offseason. He said as long as Houston will have him back, he's coming back, right? So he's kind of a swing, quasi-small ball four kind of spot as well. I don't know what they're going to do with incoming freshman Chase McCarty, high-end prep school kid, going to be a freshman next year. Could see him redshirting to take the minute load off of other, distribute those better and not waste a year of his sitting and watching a lot. Frankly, it might be better for him to get more acquainted with the college system as well. He's a very well-built kid, but I digress. The big thing here is that JWan's returning, and it appears that Houston may have its eyes set on a point guard. Now, when Fran Fraschillis tweeted out that the point guard he heard Houston had in mind was going to be a spectacular pickup, and he's talking about how good it could make Houston, I think a lot of people, myself, are like, "Oh, is he talking about Jamal? Is Jamal going to potentially come back?" Jamal had an outstanding college career, National Defensive Player of the Year in every metric, and frankly, came injury shy of the Final Four. Let's not beat around the bush about it. I do think it's worth pointing out, though, that the trick here is where do you project Jamal going to the NBA draft? I'm seeing him as a late first, early second round, a lot more early second rounds. And that's a big delineating factor because the lack of guarantees for second round picks, right? You go pro with that lack of guarantee of money as a second round pick. Now, I am a firm believer that once he gets picked up by a squad, it's all uphill. It's all moving up from there, right? It's all moving up in the right direction for Jamal after that. I think the uphill battle part, that's where my mind was going back and forth there, is just getting on the roster in the first place, right? Once they get him on the floor, they're going to want him. Digression aside, I think a lot of people assume that that's what Fran meant. In the replies, Fran actually clarified that's not what he was intending. Sounds like he has some inclination that Houston is pulling someone in. Now, I think of Mercy Miller, the incoming freshman, as a shooting guard. I think of LJ Cryer as we'll call it combo. Same with Emmanuel Sharp. A lot of the guys Houston has are good guards that maybe pass ball well or something, but are not necessarily point guards. Mercy may turn into that. LJ may turn into that. That's not the skill set they bring in initially, as I see it. I think Mercy can score with anyone in the Big 12 day one, but that's a separate podcast. I think there's three guys Houston's looking at here. Dedan Thomas, high-end 2023 recruit. Houston had high on their hopes in 2023, ultimately committed to UNLV. He had 13.5 points and 5 assists while he was there. He was all Midwest Conference and Midwest Conference Rookie of the Year. He's in the transfer portal. He had a big, did he enter the portal? Did he not enter the portal moment on Friday? It looks like he's officially and technically not still in. I've got thoughts on that. We'll tackle when it happens. He had a big game win over ranked San Diego State. He reclassed in high school, so he technically actually is the same age as a Mercy or these guys that are going to be freshmen next year, right? A lot of good things with Dedan Thomas. And again, Houston already expressed a lot of interest when he was out of high school. He got his year of playing a lot of minutes over there at UNLV. Jamal Shead's graduated, moving on to the pros. You could see how that would fit, would match up. Jason Edwards is a little bit older guy, did some JUCO stuff. He spent his last year, he was just at North Texas last year at 19 points per game. Very tough, physical guy that also shoots the ball extremely well. He would feel like a combo guard at times, but I loved watching him play in that he was a selfless 19 points per game guy. A lot of catch and shoot. If you didn't have the catch and shoot, he ran an offense kind of stuff out of it. And I think the guy that I might not have watched in Big 12 play and thought that's a Cougar until I watched more games of his. He didn't play like it necessarily because Jamal Shead had to cover him. But Milos Uzan, he's a 6'4" point guard at Oklahoma. 9 points, 4 assists per game last year. But I think the important thing is when you look at his assists, he's making up a quarter of the assists Oklahoma has. That's just not the offense they ran. That it's not indicative of his passing at all. He's a very traditional point guard type guy that's also tough and scrappy and does some of those tough guy kind of things. Those are the three guys I'd have an eye on. Dedan Thomas, Jason Edwards, and Milos Uzan. Of course, you can get excited and go look at Bronny James is listed as a point guard. What could that be bringing to the table, right? Or you can get out there and look around at a bunch of guys. I love John L. Davis. It looks like he's kind of got the guy from FAU. He's got his eyes set on a couple of the programs, and power to him, right? I just think he's got a fun game. I think, though, that if Houston nails down that point guard spot, you're looking at a really improved roster because right now in the way too early ESPN top 25 for next season, they've already got Houston number 7. They got Houston number 7 in the country. They don't account for LJ Cryer coming back. The only guy from last year they account for coming back actually is JWan Roberts. They got Chase McCarty listed as a starter on next year's lineup because of the influx and indecisiveness in some of the roster spots. They got Arsenal starting at the 2 guard, and then Sharp starting at the point guard, and then JWan and JVR at the front courts. You got to imagine when you start adding in the Cryers, adding in the Wilsons, adding in the official signings and transferring back ends of several guys, and then and then pulling back in of several guys for that COVID year. Suddenly, that 7 in front of your name moves up and up and up. Obviously, if Jamal came back, I think it'd be a giant number 1, not just because of Jamal, and that's his number, obviously, but I think that's just where they would be. I think that there's a real strong argument that they're the best team in the country last year if they just stayed healthy, right? So adding that health back into next year's team would be a big jump. As far as the read between the lines here of it all, okay, I think the point guard's going to be Dedan Thomas, and here's why. Sampson said last week he thinks we're going to be okay at the point guard position. Fran Fraschilla said it's going to be someone electric, and then clarified that it's not Jamal, at least as far as he thinks it is, right? Obviously, Jamal will be the most electric, best option, all the things. I'm not gonna. Everything I say is assuming he's not coming back, right? If Jamal can come back, you bring him back, you go in a ring, you make a real, that's what you do, right? But last week, Thomas, who has his options out there, had a great year at UNLV, but had a connection with Houston in the recruitment process the first time around, which was just a year ago, right? Because he graduated high school early. right? Last week, there were reports that he was entering the portal. And then those reports were withdrawn a couple hours later without any formal paperwork being filled out for him to enter the portal. Okay. Shortly before that, a few days before that, Houston seemed very confident, so much so that Sampson said that they're going to get their point guard. Well, you would know that if it's a guy you've had connections with before, right? I feel like what's happening a little bit here, if I'm being honest, is some gamesmanship, right? Thomas and his company, his crew, want to make sure, his people, that he has a spot in the starting lineup, right? That he has a shot to start. Well, to do that, Jamal Shead has to officially declare for the draft and that he's not coming back, right? Those things all have to happen in the right order for it to be the kind of like guarantee, I think, that frankly Dedan Thomas has warranted, right? He's earned it in the way he's shown he can play at UNLV. So that's the gamesmanship I see happening here. That's why I feel fairly confident it's there. I know there's some people on the internet talking about Uzan from Oklahoma. We will see about that. I would not be upset if he were the guy by any stretch. I'm not upset if it's any of these three guys. I'm just reading between lines here and seeing what I think will happen. Right now, would I be upset if Bronny James showed up and LeBron became a Rocket and the whole family moved to Houston and da? No, go for it, dude. My bigger thing is I just don't think that's the fit. Bronny can defend like Houston wants guys to defend, but Sampson has said before that he wants guys that can play offense and he'll teach them the defense. Bronny's just kind of the inverse of that, honestly. Now, I said a lot about Sampson in that segment, and I want to talk some about Sampson and the coaching moves and kind of what we're seeing across that uppermost echelon of college basketball. But first, as college basketball is winding down, we do need to take a moment to tell you a little bit about our buddies over at FanDuel, because right now, the NBA playoffs happening, NHL playoffs happening, baseball's officially back in full swing. FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $150 win or lose in bonus bets. Bet on everything from slat shots to home runs to slam dunks, and all that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, so in college basketball, this domino effect of coaches that we outlined a little bit yesterday and said, okay, Sampson's not going anywhere. There's another spin on this. I think that this is super like high, whatever, looking at college basketball from a bird's eye view, macro level. But I do think it's interesting to see how Houston fits into this, right? You've got all of these blue blood programs. You know, a couple years ago, Carolina moves on from Roy Williams. A couple years ago, Duke moves on from Coach K. You know, maybe not the blue blood program, and maybe not completely by choice, but Bob Huggins leaves West Virginia, right? You know, you've got Calipari now leaving Kentucky. Bill Self got in some trouble there with Adidas. He's still at Kansas for now, right? All of these high-end programs are kind of losing that figurehead that's been there for 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, Izzo at Michigan State, how much longer's he got left? We mentioned Self. You know, Boeheim left Syracuse. These kinds of guys, that generation of coaches is, frankly, aging out. They got to that blue blood spot and they left. And you could argue there's a generation like the Billy Donovans of the world, that the Hoibergs, that like tried to skip around and get to the NBA, and it hasn't necessarily worked that well for them, right? And frankly, before he came back to Houston and came back to the college level, you almost could argue that happened to Sampson, right? He went to the NBA, he was an assistant, he got in trouble in Indiana before that or whatever for stuff that's not even really against rules now. Digressions. But what you're seeing is the next generation of coaches is this much, much younger crop. Musselman, right? He's taken the USC job. Shire, Hubert Davis, right? These younger guys are filling in these blue blood spots in a different kind of way. It's happening across college basketball. The older long-standing guy is hanging it up or taking a backseat and moving somewhere else and getting replaced by a young dude, right? There's talk that the next Kentucky guy they may go after, but I want to say Dan Hurley, who just won his second consecutive championship at UConn. It's like, what bag can Kentucky throw at him to get him out of UConn, right? They got so much more money as an SEC school, but yada, 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 right? I don't know that happens. That's just an interesting hypothetical out there, I guess, right now. But it'd be the ultimate version of this, right? A young guy wins national championships at one place and then gets yanked to the blue blood to be that young generation of guys that you hope is there for a long time if you're a Kentucky fan. Houston, fascinatingly, has found themselves in the spot where, because it's Sampson and company, they've kind of got both bases covered, right? Kelvin is that long-standing, been to Final Fours in multiple programs, built up multiple programs, Hall of Fame. I mean, his own peers were saying it over the weekend at the Naismith Awards. Hall of Fame caliber coach coming through Houston and family business set up here. Who knows what's next, how long it lasts, how much longer we got. I mean, knock on wood, I hope it's a long time. And I hope it's always when he hangs it up when he wants to, not because of health things, right? I mean, that's knocking on wood for all of those things, right? But then the heir apparent at these other programs is this young, energetic whippersnapper from another upstart, whatever. The heir apparent in Houston is the literal heir, as in the literal son of Kelvin. Kellen Sampson sits in the first chair, and Kellen, for most of his time, Houston's actually been, yanked and people want him in other programs, right? The guy that Houston wants to have as that young guy when it's Houston's turn to turn it over to that young generation of coaches that is currently kind of getting these chairs, getting these seats in all these other big programs is already on the staff and has already turned down other options. It's a fascinating dynamic where Houston's actually, for all the things, I mean, we talked about the women's program last week. I don't talk a lot of baseball and softball because you don't click on it. Indicates to me I don't want to talk about it a whole lot. But baseball and softball, you could argue, are having their own struggles right now. Transitions Big 12 for all but a couple programs have looked very, very difficult. Women's volleyball did pretty well. Basketball obviously did very well. Men's basketball did very well. Across the board, the thing has been challenging. But men's basketball is not only doing well in the present tense, they've set up to do well, I should say, in the future tense as well. They've got the same young coach all of these other programs are looking to have on staff. They've got the great assistant coaches, other people want as head coach. I mentioned Quanis, Casey Beard. I could see Hollis getting the right gig. I mean, they've got those guys on staff. They've already got this built here in a way that, frankly, and this is the homer in me, I admit fully, not that it has to be family businesses like Houston's is, other programs missed this, right? I guess you could argue that Shire spent a little bit of time under K, but on the whole, like, it kind of looks like other programs have missed out on doing this, right? I mean, I guess like the closest thing to a miss in this would be that Duke had Jeff Capel on staff. Capel's now at Pitt. He's bounced around some. That kind of would have been the closest, but the ages didn't quite line up right the same way Kellen and Kelvin do for this to work. And I just think it's interesting as we're seeing these other high-end programs that are in the top 10 or top 5 every year, turning over from coach to coach, right? Shoot, even did at UConn. I know they've won 5 titles or whatever it is, and whatever they're up to now since 99. They do it with a bunch of different coaches. They went to Hurley and went young very recently, right? Houston's been set up for this, got this set up, and frankly, doing so in a really, really well done, feels fairly orchestrated kind of way. And for all the flaws you could point at other parts of the athletic department, that's one that went really, really well. Now, I want to talk about the football program as far as things are trying to bounce back and be rebuilt here in the athletic department in a moment. And I want to do so by talking about the defensive line because I got to be honest, as I look into next season, I think there's a lot of natural spoken fear about Houston's offensive line because of what you graduated, right? Because of what you lost either to graduation, the NFL, the transfer portal, whatever. A lot of unknowns on that side of the ball. I'm telling you, I'm trusting Pancake and I'm trusting what they got going over there. And I'm trusting, frankly, Iman Yagavi a little bit as I scratch my throat, maybe showing a little bit of nerves. But I do think, on the whole, they're in the right direction over there. Defensive line is a whole different ball game, and it's not because I think directionally they're heading in a bad direction, but from a like a culture of the team standpoint, the defensive line has been an anchor for what, since before Ed Oliver got here, right? Like the defensive line is going to kind of thing like you always know, okay, but there's a pro down there somewhere, right? Someone on that defensive line is going to get a shot, whether it's Nelson Caesar, Peyton Hall, whoever, right? It's Logan Hall. Someone's getting a shot. Someone's going to the NFL in that group. And now it feels like we have a lot less names we know, a lot of different types of bodies, and I worry about some of those translating to what Big 12 football looks like. So before we get into spring football this weekend, I've just got questions as to who's going to be on first, so to speak. Like I look at the team and I look at the defensive line and say, okay, you could very quickly end up out there with a bunch of guys that are 245 pounds. And that is like football in like the 1970s, right? Like that's a whole different sized defensive lineman. Now, I will say Sherwood, defense coordinator, runs an odd front defense, a 3-4 defense, or at least he did at Tulane, and you saw Houston run at periods last year with some success. And so I'd imagine you see the same thing happen this year. And there's a way you can run a lineup out there with redshirt freshman Justin Benton at 6'1", 300 pounds. Thomathan Good, who I have not seen much of yet, except I'm looking forward to it this weekend, the spring game. He is a transfer from Texas Southern. He's listed at 6 foot 350 pounds. And then Akeem Ajijalai at the other end, he's 6'2", 325 on the roster. So that looks like guys you break 300 off at all three spots, right? And I weirdly, after watching Houston play in the Big 12 last year, think there'll be times and games in which having literally just that option is really important. Okay. Now, you could also argue that that's a really short lineup. Benton 6'1", Good is 6 feet, Ajijalai is 6'2", right? Frankly, if you're trying to bat down passes, that doesn't work so well. So what's the other one? Zika Strong, Garfield Lawrence, Brandon Mack, that goes 6'6", 6'4", 6'4". And while they're giving up some on the weight side for a little bit longer, leaner, more athletic, if it's a quick passing team, you're trying to get hands up the line of scrimmage, that might be the better move. Again, I think Strong probably plays. Like Brandon Mack could play some even outside linebacker, honestly, with his athleticism and what this system looks like if he can stay healthy. We will see. I also think there's like guys you got to see on the field after what they did before, like Talik Robbins at 6'2", 265. You saw him do good things last year. Good wiggle, good explosion. What's he going to do? Tarin Cabachel, he's 6'3", 250. What's he bring to the table? Anthony Holmes, I think, has to be on the field. He's at 6'2", 295. Right? If anything, I feel like kind of a guy from each of these lineups, right? Akeem Ajijalai, right? Zika Strong, Anthony Holmes Jr. Those guys all feel like gotta have them on the field kind of guys, right? What the rotation looks like is we saw like against TCU, Texas Tech, these games where Houston kind of played like a half of football for running out of gas, right? It was very apparent that they needed more than just 3, 4, 5 linemen. Like Nelson Caesar playing every down is great, but can you really play every down? David Wegbu playing every down is great, but he also needs to play some outside linebacker for us because he has to play. Like, who's going to fill in when he's not down there, right? Those guys are both gone. And so adding depth here is going to be interesting, and kind of creating depth here is what they've got to do, right? Because they've added guys that all have talents, but also have things that they need to develop, right? Justin Benton has gained some good weight in his time at Houston already. but he needs the playing experience. He played very little last year in his redshirt season. Zyke is strong. There's a lot of things he does well. He's tall, he's long, etc. He's also, frankly, kind of light in the pants. He's 265 at 6'6", right? I mean, that stretches it out a lot. I think Ajay is really good. I do. There were spurts last year where at 325, he was listed 325 as well last year. Notice if he was 335 last year and 315 this year or whatever. It looked like he was almost carrying too much weight. It looked like he was like kind of wearing himself a little ragged. Anyway, I'm sure Fritz and company has kind of found a way to make sure he's on the right track, right? And so I look at all of these different things Houston's doing, and I just have all of these kinds of questions going to the spring game this weekend with what will they look like? Who will they play? Where will they play them? And frankly, on top of where will people play? Where will? Who will make the plays, right? Who will show up? Who will pop up on tape, even in a spring game where quarterbacks are not able to be hit and so on? Because we've kind of become accustomed to or gotten to where we rely on Houston having these defensive linemen that kind of cover up a lot of the holes in the rest of the defense. Last year, I had my complaints about linebacker play, whatever, but the defensive line kept them in some games they probably had no business being in outside of that, right? And then you lose a guy like Dedan Thomas to Colorado, and you're like, what are we going to do? Well, you find out which of these guys that we've mentioned, or maybe that I haven't mentioned, can you develop? Can you turn into a playmaker? Can you make the same kind of piece of the culture that the football program is building that you did with those other guys as well? Now, I got questions about quarterbacks. I got questions about receivers. I got questions about DBs. I got questions about the Houston Cougars going to the spring game all week long. But I'm willing to talk to you about the things that you want to talk about. So tell me in the comments down below or tell me on social media, what aspects of the spring game are you looking forward to? What questions do you have going into it this weekend? What are you looking for? What are you expecting to see, etc.? Find me at all social media platforms at Painsworth512, Painsworth 512 on, I'm about to say Twitter, X, Instagram, etc., Blue Sky, TikToks, all of the different things. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team, our Houston Cougars. JWan Roberts is Houston Cougars now that he's back as well, each and every day. Go Cougs.